Thanks, Chris. That's great again. Is there any references in your early writings, not in the Gospels, about the raising of the dead on Good Friday? I mean, it's kind of almost a throwaway line, but
Is
it
it?
must
Is
have
it? Yeah,
caused
isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
absolute havoc, wasn't it? I'm just surprised it's not mentioned anywhere else.
No, no. So I've not. It's not something I've looked at in great detail. But you're absolutely right. Of course, it is a, is this guy, and I've often kind of. I don't know how it works with other people, but often you read things. There are lots of things you think, oh, I must look into that at some point, and other things that you just think, well, they kind of fit there like this. So I've never really looked at it in huge detail. So I won't pretend I have. Tend to kind of feel that there's there are traditions, but they are traditions, in terms of Jesus kind of descending into Gehenna to preach to those who already went before and so on. They're often written more with an agenda than kind of, if you like, real knowledge. I tend towards a view of what goes on between the crucifixion and the resurrection, that it genuinely is rest. There is quiet, and I couldn't say why equivocally, because but I notice things like in Revelation where it talks about silence in heaven for half an hour, and that there being something of the God resting on the seventh day. That therefore, if you start to put things in where Jesus is doing loads and loads of stuff, but kind of in that there is almost a kind of there's almost an absence of God in creation during that day. There's a kind of peace, but actually it's going to all re-pick up again with a new sense. So put that then with that statement about the bodies and so on. What that then would mean is I wouldn't necessarily see that as an evidence of something that Jesus is doing in the underworld during this period, and more that it's a kind of there is something of a sign of maybe those who've just died or something has just happened, where there's that kind of breaking in of a supernatural experience that give people some level of testimony. I'm loath to speak to with too much clarity, because you end up building a theology on something that's more speculation. But you will regularly find, even you will hear a lot of testimonies from those who are Christians who don't therefore practice necromancy, i.e. trying to communicate with the dead, but actually something about how shortly after death there being a sense of kind of a mediated presence, that is they're praying or whatever, of someone being there. And as I say, I'm not trying to make a theology of it, but it seems that it's something of that nature, that there's something about those who are going to be alive in Christ. There's something that it's a testimony to what's going on. It probably opens up the people of Jerusalem, who talk about it, so that when we come to Pentecost, they're still talking about so and so who got some sort of message from a recently departed brother or someone. I guess there'll be those kinds of things. That's probably the kind of way I tend to think about it, but I could not say anything with any kind of confidence, Barry. So, but thanks for asking a question. I have no idea what to say about it. It's a good question in that sense. Yeah. Yeah. Would anyone else like to ask anything that I can't answer? No. No, just deafening silence. Unless someone's asking, and their mouth's just not moving, and I can't hear you. Good.
So I thought it was interesting. You're giving the historical background that we know, and the thought came into my head that nothing happens in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So that there's a lot of external influences, and it's not until you try and read all the assembled evidence from people like Josephus and everybody else that you start to build that picture up. So I guess that's a thank you really for doing all that legwork.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, I think I said it earlier in the series. It's one of those things that I'm wired in the kind of way where I don't have to have the answer fully tied down, but I need to know enough to feel like there's something there. So I sometimes feel like my lack of faith that means I want to go and know, get a feel of what, to a point where it suddenly feels like, yeah, that makes sense. That feels like exactly what people would do.
I don't think it's a lack of faith. I think it's just curiosity.
Yeah,
And
no, I know, but there's
that's
something in
okay.
that wants to understand sometimes. So and sometimes I think, well, that this is where I've got to on it. So I wouldn't say that in years to come others will get further and much better or anything like that. It's much more that for my own sake, to try and understand, to make it into a very real human story. It's useful to see those things.
Yeah. I mean, my brother asks questions. He's not a Christian. He asks questions, and he asks from an historical perspective. So actually knowing some of the background and what different people have said and where the evidence for that is actually a useful part of our discussion.
It really, and actually, just as a throw-in, because this is a really good point, Greg, is so it was only less than 2 centuries ago. If you go back 2 centuries, there's the height of the kind of the Gospels weren't written until the second or third century. They were written by people who didn't know they had an agenda, and people could say that because the archaeology just didn't exist for Israel. And over the years, the stuff has been found. Sometimes things don't fit exactly, but basically, the fundamental story is consistently 200 years later is more and more concrete. So if I give you just 2 things which I've become aware of in the last few weeks, so it was just 4 years ago that that actually pretty much 100% is agreed. Not really necessarily Christians, but the secular world has now agreed that they now know where Sodom was, and we actually know what happened to it. And it is remarkable because it actually on the Kikar Plain, just exactly where the Bible said it was. Years Christians have believed it's around the Dead Sea because they thought maybe an earthquake around there made it disappear, but it is exactly where it said it was. They buried down. They found a 20-inch layer of charcoal that still smelt burnt when they dug it up. And it turns out, because they've got a 300-foot across meteorite hit the atmosphere, burst in the sky into flame, and produced the equivalent of something like 20 Hiroshima bombs across the plain. That's absolutely scorched the whole land, and for 7 centuries nobody tried to even build on it because it was so devastated. The pottery below that layer had actually been turned into glass. And when they were excavating it, the archaeologists thought it must be didn't make sense because that style of being able to produce glassware hadn't been invented. But when they looked at it, it was the wrong way around. And they actually even found that the crystals of chemicals like the salts had actually been melted because the heat was so high. So that's something that was only discovered 4 years ago. But if you like, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, fire really did rain down from heaven. That even all these 2 millennia later, when they excavated, it was still smelt of burnt wood when they excavated it. And then just in the last 2 weeks, on Mount Ebal, where God pronounces in the book of Jeremiah and Deuteronomy that they're going to go and declare a curse, they actually found a piece of folded lead with the curse written on it, which has the name Yahweh written on it, and dates from the 17th century, which and people have been saying for years the name Yahweh doesn't enter until it doesn't come along till much later. It's actually got the name Yahweh scribbled onto it. So even in the last few days there have been press releases coming out on this. So it was identified as something that was excavated in the 80s, but it was a screwed up piece of lead. And years later, someone said, "Oh, those we now know what those are. They are when you curse something, you curse them." So then they're saying, "Oh, well, it's found in a place where actually we're told about them being a curse being laid out." So I wonder what it says inside, but we can't unravel it without destroying it. You know how it goes. But they just in the last year, a technique was developed in France to actually scan right the way through lead to actually see what's being scratched onto the surface. And there in the surface, you actually found written in those ancient Hebrew hieroglyphs, even including the name Yahweh on it, which up until now has not appeared until several centuries later. And scholars have said there is nothing there. So that's just a simple little example of how every year, as new stuff is dug up, we're finding more and more things that actually concretely kind of confirm the Bible. But if you go back 200 years ago, none of that existed at all. So it's kind of almost like in these last days, or however you want to see them, however long they last, the last 2 centuries or so, that their information is kind of coming to light that is helping actually turn stories which were kind of fables you accept by faith into actually there's real history here. It may be told in a slightly theological way or whatever, but actually you can see the basic facts match with what the texts tell us is the case. So, sorry, that was a long-winded answer to your question, Greg. But yeah, but we find all sorts of things all of the time. I'm always saying this. There's a real explosion of archaeological understanding, which has kind of come about because of the way science can work on things and do stuff. So, anyone else like to ask anything or say anything? No. Well, I will just say then. So next week it's Resurrection Week.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's fantastic. We get to Resurrection Week. And of course, there's always that little moment where, which I often think when we're doing it, is by far the biggest testimony to resurrection is the ongoing testimony of lives that are transformed by the gospel, which is an evidence in its own way, which is that this common experience all out throughout the world, which that those that somehow orientate their lives and recognize something that's happened in Jesus, if whatever their level of understanding, actually have lives turned around and transformed. So we won't be able to necessarily capture all of that, but we will see the kind of the historic side of how it all fits together. So good. Anyone else like to say anything else or ask anything at this stage?
Thank you. That was great, Kristen.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Good. Well, bless you all. So I will hopefully see you next week. So I'll do my little plug saying, if you find this is useful and you're in getting stuff out of it, please feel free to make a gift. it's I live by ministry, so it always helps. But anyway, we'll see you next week then, and I will go and grab something to eat and drink now. I noticed a few people have been enjoying their dinners while we've been going through the session. So bless you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.